Our bracketology was very tough this week because we have very much entered the everyone stinks portion of the proceedings. Everybody's got a bad loss except for a couple teams, but some of those teams with bad losses also have good wins. And that's my struggle. Like, we put the bracket out and the graphic went out Sunday morning on social media, and people went berserk because they're like, why is Notre Dame in there? Don't you know they lost to Northern Illinois? Why is Alabama in there? Don't you know they lost to Vanderbilt? I'm like, of course I know this, but Alabama also beat Georgia, and Notre Dame won at Texas A&M, which looks unbelievably good right now.
Yeah, you just have to put yourself in a position where you're weighing what you think is going to be important and how things are going to play out. At the end of the year, these terrible losses that everybody's fired up about aren't going to be what tells the story of who gets into this thing. What's going to tell the story is who you beat. And both Notre Dame and Alabama, since those are two that you brought up, have glaringly bad losses on their resume, but also Alabama still arguably holds the best win in the sport, maybe outside of Vanderbilt, right?
Does Notre Dame have the second best win?
And then Notre Dame's win over Texas A&M looks a heck of a lot better now than it did 48 hours ago. So, you have to start weighing the quality win aspect of this. And I think that's probably weighted a little bit heavier than the miserable loss.
I think so too. That was what I went with, because that is what the committee has told us over time. Now, in some cases, they would use a terrible loss as a differentiating factor. Like, I remember Nick Saban going on SportsCenter in 2017. That was the year that Ohio State had that terrible loss to Iowa where they kept throwing interceptions. And he said, if we'd lost like that, and he means by that many points, you wouldn't even be considering us. And at that point, they had lost in the Iron Bowl. But in this case, there are going to be a lot of teams with losses. Like, you're not going to be able to have one loss teams only or two loss teams only. There's a chance there's going to be a 3-loss team in the bracket. So I think the committee is going to be much more about who did you beat. This is what we talked about on the show last week, Ari, when we got asked in Dear Andy and Ari about what if South Carolina went 9-3 against that schedule. Now, after the way they lost to Ole Miss, I think that's probably not happening. But there's some other schools, Oklahoma, I think Alabama falls into this bucket too with their schedule, where you could lose 3 games, but you also might have 2 wins against teams that made the playoff. And I think that's enough for consideration.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you this too, Andy, because we do similar exercises, but there are a few teams out there that are unbeaten and have pretty solid resumes at this point in the year, and there are teams that are situated from a talent standpoint in a way that we know is probably a safe bet to say that they're a better team. How did you weigh your bracketology when it came to teams like Iowa State? And I know you have BYU in there as the Big 12 champion, but some of these teams that are fringe top 10 teams right now because they are one of the few teams that haven't lost yet.
I'm just picturing what's going to happen the rest of the season. I'm projecting out what's going to happen the rest of the season. Iowa State goes to Morgantown this week. Iowa State may fall from the ranks of the undefeated this week. Mm-hmm. And I know what you're going to say. Well, they're not they're still undefeated now. Put them in there. Okay.
No, I'm not going to say
that. No, I think some of our viewers are going to say that, but that's okay. I understand that. If they keep winning, they're going to be in there anyway. Like, if they keep winning, Iowa State not only has a chance to win the Big 12 and get in, but I think there could be a Big 12 team that gets in as an at-large.
Yeah, like, which is why there's a difference.
Big 12 team that loses the conference championship game, there's still a chance they're in as an at-large.
There's a difference between what it would look like if the season ended today and what you think it's going to look like. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding a lot of times when people are looking at these of like, what do you think it's going to look like in 6 weeks? And, that's how I could have Iowa State in my top 10, but the next 4 out and the bubble watch, because that's, 2 things at once at the same time. So, the way that we're looking at this, it's just getting more difficult because you're going to have to start sifting through a bunch of teams that are very similar in terms of bad losses, and you're going to have to start weighing what you think is important. And it's just going to get more and more difficult, especially after days like Saturday.
Yeah, and I don't think Iowa State's going to be perfect, but if they stay perfect, then that makes it easy. Like, please, stay perfect. That will make this very easy because they'll be in. Like, they go to Morgantown and win. I bet they're in it next week, and then they just keep moving up if they keep winning. Miami was a tough one because that's twice in a row that Miami has really struggled. And I know the Miami fans got mad because I took them out of that presumptive ACC championship spot last week after they struggled against Virginia Tech. And I left them out of it. And you can say, well, Clemson got crushed by Georgia, and that tells you what's going to happen against Miami. It doesn't tell me what's going to happen against Miami. Miami's not Georgia. And right now, the way Clemson is playing, I trust them more. If they were to face Miami in the ACC championship game, I trust Clemson more. That could change. Like, the next 3 weeks could be completely different, and we put Miami back in that spot. But the fact that Miami won that game tells me there's a really good chance Miami is going to be a playoff team, because you have to be able to win games like that. Like, you have to be able to come back and win. And I think that's really good for that team because, Ari, think about the past Miami teams, whether they're the Mario Cristobal ones, the Manny Diaz ones. How many of those Miami teams would have been able to stage that comeback on the road against Cal?
Yeah, all those teams would have folded. I mean, it would have been an absolute disaster, and not just folded in the game, but might have folded in the season. Like we've seen that even last year after the Neal debacle. So, yeah, I mean, when you're weighing Miami, you have to ask yourself, well, what's more valuable to you? Again, this is a game you have to play a lot. The fact that they erased a 35-10 deficit in the middle of the third quarter and won the football game, or the fact that they were down 35-10 to Cal. It's like you can get caught up in the excitement of the comeback and lose track of the fact that they were getting their butts kicked by a team that we don't think is very good. I like to trend toward the positive things. Like, if you are able to come back after playing as poorly as they did and win a game that dramatic on the road, like, I think that's a positive, especially considering the fact that we know that in the sport, it's very hard to go undefeated. It's very hard to stay locked in when you're getting your butts kicked. And you know what? At a certain point, you're going to get to an intersection in the season where just being undefeated by itself is virtuous, right? Like, because because there are a lot of teams out there, the who have you played crowd. I mean, with how the season has gone so far, being 6-0 and 5-0, like some of the the Iowa States and the Miamis of the world, is an accomplishment. So the thing that I thought was interesting is that we had a discussion about A&M after their big win over Mizzou on Saturday, and you already had them into the field. Tell me more a little bit about the A&M decision.
Well, just watching the way they played, and remember, the other thing the committee has to consider is how teams evolve throughout the season. So we saw them with Marcel Reed running the ball and surviving that way. They go back to Connor Wegman, presumably because he got healthy, and just torched Missouri. And we think Missouri's a good team. We don't know if Missouri's a really good team. Now, we were saying, oh, they got taken to overtime by Vanderbilt. That's pathetic. Well, guess what? They didn't lose to Vanderbilt like Alabama did. So maybe not.
Yeah.
Texas A&M beat this team 41-10. Just crushed them. So watching A&M do that, they feel like they are rounding out into a more complete team. Like, because you wondered, who's your downfield threat? Who scares you offensively? Well, Mr. Bussey scares me now.
Yeah.
Their running game scares me. If Wegman's going to be able to distribute the ball efficiently, their offensive line is blocking well. Like, that's a formidable offense to go with a defense that probably has one of the best lines in football.
Yeah, and you also have to take the schedule into account. You can make a case that Texas A&M has one of the 2 or 3 most favorable schedules remaining in the SEC. So, that's going to be a big deal when it comes to whether they get in or not, especially in the 8 to 11 range.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The matchups here are interesting too. When you look at this bracket, I essentially made a Georgia-Alabama rematch. I wasn't intending to do this, but it worked out that way because I was going to put Alabama 1 spot ahead of Georgia because Alabama beat Georgia by a touchdown. But this actually would give Georgia another crack at Alabama in Tuscaloosa. So you could essentially avenge the loss. Now, this assumes probably that Georgia loses another game. This assumes that they probably lose at Texas or they lose at Ole Miss down the stretch. So we don't know what's going to happen there. Ari, before we continue, I had to tell everybody about Prize Picks, the best daily fantasy game in America. Download the app, use the code Staples, play $5, get $50 instantly. It was not my finest weekend on Prize Picks. I had a good feeling about some things. They didn't quite work out. Alex Orgy, I thought, would score a touchdown against Washington. He winds up getting pulled for Jack Tuttle. Haynes King, I thought, okay, these guys at Georgia Tech, they're going to break Duke's undefeated streak. They did that, but he did not throw for as many yards as I thought he would. Noah Fafita for Arizona did throw for as many yards. Unfortunately, he didn't end up very happy because Texas Tech came back and won that game. But not my finest moment, but that's okay. That's what makes Prize Picks fun. You try again next time. I got a little sprinkled in on the NFL on Sunday just to see if I can get that hot streak going again. But you pick squares. Players are attached to squares. For instance, as we record this, I'm hoping Dalton Kincaid can catch another pass or two for the Bills because that would make my life much better. So Prize Picks, download that app, use the code Staples, play 5, get $50 instantly to play. All right. What about my bracket would you have changed? What would you have done differently?
Well, the one thing is I'm not sure I'm 100% bought in on Navy, and I know you wanted to talk about them.
Yeah.
But my 2 group of 5 teams right now that I'm loving are UNLV and Boise, and I actually had a hard time picking between those two. I know that UNLV is coming off a pretty tough loss on Friday night, but I saw some things in that game that made me think that this team could win the Mountain West. And on the other hand, the team that's probably going to contend for that is a team that has a running back who goes for 30 yards every time he touches the ball in Ashton Genty. So why Navy, and how did you get to that point?
I love the way they're just crushing people. And the thing about it with Navy, now the Navy and Army appear to be on a collision course in the American. That may change because Tulane's playing really well. Charlotte's actually undefeated in the American right now. But I think at this point, it's probably Army, Navy, and Tulane are the ones that you really need to pay attention to. Memphis also, but Memphis already lost to Navy. So I think the way Navy and Army are beating people, they are just clobbering them. Navy is such a tough out. That offense is so tough. Drew Cronick, their new offensive coordinator, he was the head coach at Mercer. It's kind of a mix of the wing tee and the triple option, which, I mean, that is a pain in the ass to prepare for. And so what's interesting about this bracket, I've got Navy and Notre Dame in. In real life, I don't know that necessarily happens, because if Navy's in, it's probably because they beat Notre Dame, and that probably knocks Notre Dame out.
Yeah. Or it doesn't. If Navy turns out to be the team that you think they are, I don't know that it does. So I think that's definitely possible. But
actually, a question about this, sorry. Let's say Navy went. We'll use Navy for this example. You could also use Army because they're beating people the same way, same conference, also undefeated. But let's say Navy or Army goes undefeated. They're probably not 12.
No.
Like 11 or 10 or 9, maybe.
I actually toyed around with this, Andy, because I thought that there is, I don't know, maybe I'm giving the committee too much credit here. And I'm not going to address exactly what you just said, but I'm going to give you another scenario that kind of mirrors that. Like, what if UNLV and Boise play twice and UNLV went and they split that? Like, is it possible that both could get in somehow? I don't know. Like, I don't think maybe so. Not.
I think the one that wins the Mountain West championship game will be the one that gets in.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think if like there's a bunch of teams that are losing 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, but they're not going to be undefeated. And Boise State obviously gave Oregon a hell of a game in Eugene, but an almost win is not the same thing. An almost win against Syracuse for UNLV.
I guess if they do split, they both have 2 losses, and that's tough for G5.
Yeah. No, but in that scenario, the winner of the Mountain West Championship game, depending on what's happening over the American, they still may get in. So
yeah,
I think that bears watching. But if you haven't watched Navy yet this season, if you haven't watched Army yet this season, it's a hell of a lot of fun to watch. If you love just the variety of offensive football and college football, and what makes it different, say, from the NFL, watch these two teams play because they're really good at what they do. And it's really different from what everybody else does. So that part, I just think is fun. I'm kind of excited about how this is going to play out down the stretch. But one thing we should mention, we're down here at number 12. We need to go to number 1. I moved Ohio State into the number 1 spot, and I've had Ohio State in the number 1 spot in other weeks this season. I think they're the best constructed roster in the country. That said, Ari, I am very unsure about whether they'll be the 1 spot next week because I don't know if they're going to go to Eugene and win. I think Oregon may beat them next week.
Yeah. It just seems more likely right now that Ohio State could finish with less losses than the SEC champion. And like, it's going to be 1 and 2 between Big Ten and SEC, right? So it's like, who do you think's more likely to go undefeated this year? Texas or Ohio State? Like, I don't know. I probably would go with Ohio State because
and they both might lose on Saturday. That's the craziest part. Now, I don't even have Oklahoma in my first 4 out, but I can tell you right now, if Oklahoma beats Texas this week, Oklahoma is going to be in the bracket next week.
Yeah, and we've learned every single year what happens in Dallas with those two teams. I don't know what is in the water out here. I drink it, and I seem to be okay, but things just go kind of...
No, you're not.
Yeah,
like,
maybe I'm not.
It actually explains everything about that game.
Yeah, but it does, like, every year you think one team is going to beat the crap out of the other. There have been so many of these matchups where Oklahoma came in feeling like they were Texas, and Texas came in feeling like they were Oklahoma in this year's version anyway. And the game went off the rails. So I'm excited to go. I've never been to it. I've watched every one of them on TV the last, however many years. And the fact that we get to go together is going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
It is going to be awesome. I cannot wait. I can tell you right now, this bracket's going to look different next week. I'm so glad that we're getting this level of churn. We're getting this level of craziness because that's what I was hoping for. And I think we're going to see a lot more of these kind of earth-shaking games as we go, especially in the next 2 weeks. So I can't wait to see what the bracket looks like next week. Can't wait to see what it looks like the week after that, because I think it's going to undergo some serious shifts. And then, oh, by the way, we get to see the committee's rankings here in a few weeks too. So we'll have a lot more to digest at that point. But right now, a lot of drama, a lot of potential changes in the bracket. If you don't like this one, you might like next week's better.